Protests erupt across America after the Breonna Taylor grand jury decision. Could Johnson & Johnson have the COVID vaccine to beat? And more pain for the performing arts. Here's what you need to know. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need2Know podcast for Thursday, September 24th. I am Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Hey, Carlo. Good morning.
Oh, good morning, Wags. How are you today? A lot of news this last 24 hours, I gotta say.
A lot of news this last 24 weeks.
Lifetime? Yeah, really.
All right, let's get to some of that news. Let's start with the Breonna Taylor case. A former Louisville police officer has been indicted on 3 counts of first-degree wanton endangerment in connection with the killing of Breonna Taylor. So Brett Hankinson, a former detective on the force, was charged with endangering Taylor's neighbors by shooting 10 rounds from outside of her apartment in that raid back in March. Some of those bullets entered adjacent apartments, so that's what the endangerment charges are about. They're not actually about Breonna Taylor herself.
Right.
The 2 other officers who shot Taylor 6 times, not charged.
Demonstrations pretty much erupting immediately. Louisville, New York, Chicago, LA, cities across the country last night. Protesters enraged, a lot of people enraged that none of the officers were directly charged in the actual killing of Miss Taylor. Two Louisville police officers were shot last night. Those injuries appear to be non-life threatening, according to officials. A suspect is in custody in that situation. Protests in Seattle and Portland turned violent. People hurling Molotov cocktails at authorities. A lot of this is sort of like a replay of what we've seen earlier this month, Jill. Although, again, a lot of these protests, like the ones in New York, were peaceful and just people out in the streets protesting, right? And doing their duty as Americans, I guess you could say. I feel like I don't have a lot of words for the story. Like, there's not really much for me to add. I mean, everything about the Breonna Taylor story from the beginning is just so viscerally sad. It's just like one of these things that just didn't have to happen, right? And this poor woman lost her life. I'd recommend, if anything, there was a story in the New York Times on, I believe, August 30th, almost a month ago, by the reporter Rukmini Callimachi, who's a really incredible investigative reporter with that paper. I'm going to link to it in the newsletter today. If you haven't read it, do so. It really is like the definitive reporting of exactly what happened in this woman's apartment on that night back in March.
Per your suggestion, I saw that you had written that in the newsletter and posted to it. So I read the article this morning. Okay, so it answers a lot of questions that I had, which was what is the backstory here? Why were police, it is very clear cut, right? A woman was killed while sleeping in her own apartment. But you're kind of like, what led to this? Okay, so basically the reason police went to Breonna Taylor's apartment in the first place is because of her relationship with an ex-boyfriend who is a convicted drug dealer. So police were, I guess, trying to make the argument that her apartment was part of his scheme, even though
she was holding his drugs.
Very thin argument. And it lays out a lot of the missteps by police. They didn't really follow the correct protocols here. But even more importantly, the article talks about Breonna Taylor herself. She was trying to turn her life around. She had a new boyfriend. They were trying to have a baby. They already had a name picked out. She had just worked 4 overnight shifts, as an EMT. She was trying to become a nurse. She had Post-it notes all over her house of goals and things that she wanted to do.
Oh, I thought that detail was so sad.
Yeah. I have the chills even talking about it because it's just so horribly tragic.
Yeah, look, I don't want to. I don't really have much else to say except that, and this is a conversation in a debate for another day. But we got to do something in this country about the drug war, really. Because there are so many of these stories that would not have happened if not for the prosecution of drug offenses. And I'm not saying that means that there should be like open air heroin markets on the street, but so many of these stories of Black people dying at the hands of police come from the some point of contact that has to do with drugs. And I don't know, I don't even know how I feel about that, but it's just, I think that's just something that as a country we have to start reckoning with.
All right, let's switch gears and talk a little bit about politics. President Trump last night.
Oh, good.
On lighter news.
Are you trying to get me worked up already?
Yes, it's 6 a.m., Carlo. I like to get your blood boiling. President Trump last night refusing to commit to a peaceful transfer of power if he were to lose the election. Earlier in the day, he predicted that the Supreme Court will decide the outcome of the election and says that is why his yet-to-be-named nominee must be seated before November 3rd. Lawyers for the Trump campaign have already started to challenge mail-in voting rules in a number of states, setting the stage for a protracted legal battle if the margins are close on election night. Once again, it's like the president always saying kind of like the quiet parts out loud. It's like we knew this is what it was about, but like you're actually just saying it.
Well, I mean, oh, Lordy. Okay, so I'm going to play out for a second here. I know I don't want to start everyone's day off on the wrong foot, but it's important to talk about this. So I'm going to play out the nightmare scenario for American democracy right now. So let's do it. So first thing to remember is mail-in ballots favor Democrats by wide margins, right? That's just what all of the data shows. So picture this, right? It's 4 a.m. on November 4th after a long election night. Trump is leading in some combination of Pennsylvania, Michigan, or Wisconsin by a couple points, 4 or 5 points maybe, even though he has way down in the popular vote. He declares victory and goes to bed, right? No mail-in votes at that point have yet been counted. That lead in these swing states starts to get smaller by the day as those votes begin to get counted, because remember, they favor Democrats in a lot of cases. The Trump campaign then sues to get an injunction against counting more mail-in ballots in those states, which sets off a court battle that eventually reaches the Supreme Court, where a new justice that was just appointed and rammed through by the Senate gives the court a 5-4 victory in Trump's favor, with John Roberts siding with the liberals. So think about sort of Bush v. Gore in 2000 on steroids, right? Instead of that happening in a country that was relatively stable, as it was in 2000, it's sort of laid on top of America in 2020. Half the country or more immediately finds the results to be illegitimate. And we go from there. This is not some like MSNBC fever dream, by the way. As you mentioned, President Trump is broadcasting this. He made those comments yesterday on camera. Vice President Pence said the same thing on Fox News 2 nights ago. Anonymous Trump officials telling the Atlantic magazine yesterday that they are preparing a legal battle on mail-in ballots already, just assuming that this is going to be a close race and it's going to hinge on mail-in ballots. I'm not saying that this is going to happen. A lot of things would have to come together for something like this to take place. It's one of these like high-risk, low-probability events, right? It's something that is unlikely, but it's not possible. And I think it's something as a country that we need to prepare for and be aware that it is something that could happen in a couple months, less than in 6 weeks.
A high-risk, low-probability event and something that we need to prep for. What else comes to mind? A pandemic, coronavirus.
Yes, exactly. Just like that.
Okay, and I'm gonna leave your nightmare scenario in place. So for anyone having breakfast right now, they could just chew on that.
Sorry about that.
But I'm gonna go and switch gears and talk a little bit about the pandemic, because we do have a bit of good news. How about that? Johnson & Johnson has started the final stage of clinical trials for its vaccine. So Johnson & Johnson, if you're keeping score here, is the 4th company in the United States to reach stage 3, but it's also one of the most promising. The trial is going to be the largest. They are looking for 60,000 volunteers. The vaccine requires only 1 shot, not 2, so you don't need that booster like four weeks later. And it also doesn't need to be kept frozen. So that is a major logistical hurdle if these vaccines need to be frozen for when it comes to mass distribution. So that's the good news. Also, it's still early, but the first wave of data related to COVID-19 transmission in K through 12 schools is pretty promising. Researchers at Brown University found extremely low levels of infection among both students and teachers nationwide, about 0.1%.
Yeah. This didn't get a lot of play yesterday, but this is I found this to be really promising. I think again, like you said, it's very early. We're only a couple of weeks since the beginning of school in a lot of places, and because testing and reporting, as we know, differ so widely among the states. You have to take an analysis like this with some grain of salt because it's just like all the data is like so messed up.
Yeah.
But that being said, I mean, one of the scientists in this Brown University analysis said this suggests that we're, quote, not seeing schools as crucibles for onward transmission. Basically, what they're saying is, a lot of the worry was schools were going to be these super spreader events with kids just like hacking and coughing all over each other and getting teachers sick, and that hasn't happened yet. Knock on wood. Who knows what could happen, but it hasn't happened yet, and we should note that that's good. That's just good news. In colleges, by the way, it's another story entirely.
It's just the opposite.
The situation in college is just like out of control. But on the school front, we were talking about the story on our editorial call last night, Jill, and Peter, our boss, he was talking about how his daughter yesterday, or 2 days ago, I think, she came home with the sniffles, right? So normally it's like he was saying, like, she's always sick, right? She always has the sniffles. But they took her out of school and they brought her to the doctor, and the doctor was like, yeah, she probably has a cold. But the symptoms for a common cold are very similar to the symptoms for COVID. So does that mean that now she has to be tested again? Do they have to keep her out of school? Megan Pratt, who is our DC reporter, she chimed in and said, her daughter's school canceled at the last minute yesterday because a teacher had symptoms. And again, those symptoms without rapid testing, you don't know. Are those symptoms just a regular good old fashioned cold, or is it something like COVID? And also, I don't know about anybody else, but my allergies have started. Both me and my wife have started getting really bad allergies the last few days. And again, like when you're sitting there sniffling and your throat hurts and your eyes are all watering, what can you do other than think like, oh, could this be COVID, right?
I mean, my husband, I feel bad because he's like, it's my behavior, but he's like scared to sneeze or cough in the house because I'll hear it from wherever I am, and I'm like, what's going on? Are you okay? Are you sick? And he's like, I can't, like, can you let me live? Like, get off my back. I feel like I've created sort of
have to cough in there. Yeah.
He's like, I can't, he's like, I have something caught in my throat. It went down the wrong pipe. Leave me alone. But this is, I guess, where we are as a society right now. Okay, New York's famed Metropolitan Opera has decided to cancel its entire 2020-21 season, a worrisome sign that major cultural institutions from theater to the opera are a long way from returning to normal. The Met is the largest performing arts organization in the country. It's going to stay dark until next September. Broadway is going to be dark through at least the end of the year. And Carlo, it also came out yesterday that the ball drop in Times Square will be virtual this New Year's Eve. Which, by the way, like, good riddance. That is my nightmare. Yeah. Besides for the year 2020, forcing me to go to a ball drop in New York City when it's freezing cold and you can't
like
get out.
True New York.
You have to
spoken like a true New York.
Yeah, there's like no bathrooms.
Everyone here. Oh. No, it's look, that being said, all of this is bad news, right? It's bad news for New York City's hospitality industry. And I think this is another one of these stories that just isn't getting the coverage that I think it deserves. Major hotels in Manhattan and tourist-friendly restaurants, we've been talking about these restaurants for a while now. They're already closing for good, right? The Hilton in Times Square, just shut it down. The Omni, I believe, which is one of the big tourist hotels in Midtown, they're done. It's easy to say, like, if you don't care, it's easy to not really care about something like this if you don't live here. But remember, New York City is the biggest economic engine in America. What happens here has cascading effects for the rest of the country. And we were talking about yesterday with the UN, right? There's no guests. There's nobody here for the hotel. So there's not going to be anybody here for Broadway, for the Rockettes, right? For the ball drop, for the Met. It's just all, it's all the same problem. And and there's no help in sight from the government.
On that note, with stimulus, I'm glad you mentioned it because we took it as a given, and the stock market, from just a market perspective, investors took it as a given that lawmakers here in the U.S. were going to pass another stimulus package. What it looked like and how much money was going to be in it, that was up for debate. We know Republicans are looking about $1 trillion. Democrats wanted something more in the line of $3 trillion. and the thinking was they'd meet in the middle at 2, right? Like that just seemed to be, rational people were like, all right, they'll work it out. Right. That has not happened. The former package expired weeks ago, and now it's looking like they probably won't pass anything new until after the election. They'll approve a new Supreme Court justice. Yeah. But actual help for restaurants, for industry, whatever you think is important, whether people who are unemployed, getting extra help for them, whether it's help for businesses, whether it's help for certain industries,
landlords,
for states who need that money to give to teachers. States don't have the option of just going into debt and not balancing their budget. It's different than the federal government. So if they don't get help in the way of, they don't get federal money, then they're in a lot of trouble. And we're talking a lot of people's jobs on the line, teachers. That comes to mind specifically.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, Jill. And again, I mean, a lot of these small businesses, not just in New York, but all over the place, they're basically relying on the goodwill of their landlords. And in some cases, the landlords were saying, okay, look, we're going to, we'll float you for a couple months, but, we're 7 months into this now. Like even, landlords have to pay property taxes, right? If they don't have any income coming in, the cafe down the street from my old apartment just closed yesterday. It's been around forever in Brooklyn. It's like an institution. And it's just this slow moving disaster. And it just feels like nobody's paying attention to it.
So Dr. Fauci was testifying on Capitol Hill yesterday. I don't know if you've caught any of it. He had an exchange with Rand Paul that went viral.
Oh, baby.
So Rand Paul basically arguing that Fauci is playing politics with everything. So Rand Paul saying, how can you point to New York as an example of good behavior, of a job well done on coronavirus when it has the highest death rate? And it's like, that was in the beginning. And there were so many mistakes in New York. And I don't think anyone would say that there were not. But post that horrible, horrible spike in the beginning, I think New York has gotten its act together in terms of following the CDC guidelines. And that's what Fauci was saying. He's like, look, our rate of infection at this point is less than 1%, which is pretty darn good. It could go up, and there are spikes. I'm not, not saying the battle's over. But then he was also saying, the reason isn't because New York has followed the protocols. It's because they have herd immunity already at 22% of people having some sort of the antibodies. And Fauci's like, that is not herd immunity. Like, can we just at least stick to the science? I mean, you may say, it's not worth it to me to shut everything down because X amount of lives, I don't know. Just can we stick to the science, please? It's so.
Well, I mean, also, I mean, Dr. Fauci, God bless him, the man has not lost his cool, I believe, in any of this until yesterday, and he lost it with Rand Paul. So it's like, if you're the guy who finally gets Dr. Fauci to blow his top, like, what does that say?
And his blowing the top was not so crazy, by the way.
Yeah, right.
His blowing the top is like me after a cup of coffee. Yeah. It's basically you on this podcast every morning. Okay, I want to do a quick update now on a story we talked about yesterday. Amazon now disavowing an announcement that it had co-developed that $500 connected exercise bike to undercut Peloton. So we reported that, and unfortunately, immediately, it was like right after we wrapped up, Amazon came out and saying, no, it has nothing to do with the Prime bike, which Echelon Fitness announced in a press release that it had launched in partnership with the e-commerce giant. So the bike taken off Amazon, the original press release from Echelon has been deleted, and Carlo and I lived in shame for about 24 hours yesterday.
Yeah, I don't know what the heck this was all about.
What was this?
I don't know, but I did want to just get on the record with it. I feel like a schmuck because, like you said, this was coming out yesterday morning, and I didn't catch it. A bunch of people caught it in the newsletter and on the podcast and wrote me. So my apologies. I don't know what the deal is with this. Maybe we'll find out more.
And really quick, it has been rumored for months Tom Cruise working on a secret project with Elon Musk's SpaceX that would see him star in a movie actually shot in space. Well, now a well-regarded Twitter account that follows space missions has published a manifest that appears to show Cruise and his longtime collaborator, the director Doug Liman, booked on a SpaceX trip to the International Space Station for next October. We don't know much else. It definitely seems, Carlo, like Tom Cruise is up to something.
I'm glad we got the story in because I mean I am a huge Tom Cruise fan, like straight up. The man is nuts, but he delivers. And Tom Cruise in space, I am so sold for that. Go watch the most recent Mission Impossible movie if you haven't seen it. And you just want like 2.5 hours of just pure escapism and just pure Tom Cruise insanity, like running around the globe. But yeah, like I am, take my money. Tom Cruise filmed in space, take my money.
And he's known for doing all of his own stunts. He's been injured doing his own stunts.
Yeah.
So like he's going to space. They're not using
He's
the
doing
green
it,
screen
man.
here.
Yeah.
All right, Carlo, missed you.
We packed
missed
a lot
you
in
person.
today, Jill.
Yes, we did. I hope everyone out there is hanging in there. That's what you need to know for Thursday, September 24th.
All right, guys. We'll see you tomorrow.